Hi, how is everyone? My name is Marcos Escobedo. I am a Math 200 student at Kenyatta College, and I'm just doing this walkthrough on the final presentation to help anyone with any questions that may come up. For this first slide, you just want to have your question stated properly. You don't want to have your variable codes, but what you are calling your question, and it should be in the format, is there an association between blank and blank? For the second slide, you want to explain why your research is done and what association you think there is. Give examples of this and be pretty thorough. You should also have an image that is relevant to your research and kind of describes your research in a visual manner. For your literature review, you want to have some sources that are talking about your research and go more in depth about what you want to research. You also want to state what these sources are saying, whether they're agreeing or disagreeing with what you are saying for your research. So are they agreeing or disagreeing with your hypothesis, and how so? For a data source, we are all using the AdHealth codebook, and we just have to make sure that for this one we're being pretty clear about the AdHealth codebook, who is understudy, and how the data was collected in the first place. For our demographics, we just want to include the sample size and who is being surveyed here, the race, and we just want to talk about descriptive statistics here and talk about the center, the shape, or the spread. For our measures, we have our two variables that we are going to be comparing. We want to have the question from the AdHealth codebook, the AdHealth code variable code, and what we are calling our variable. We also want to have if our variable is cat or quant, and if it is an explanatory or a response variable. An explanatory variable explains a response, so depending on how your question is formatted, this will also affect this. Will be our variable slides. So we are just taking our variables from the AdHealth codebook and putting them straight into SAS and making tables with them. If our data is categorical, we will need to format it and just explain and just show what we formatted basically. And this is the same thing for this slide. If it's categorical as well, same thing. For exploratory data analysis, we are seeing what our graph is saying. We are getting our graph from SAS and we are stating what that graph is saying. So we are going into further detail and making insights about that graph. If it is categorical, we are summarizing the percentages, and if it's quant, we are mostly talking about the shape of the graph. And that is the same thing for this slide. I would just recommend to go further than what is seen on the slide and try to make some insights from the information presented. For our data analysis discussion, we are basically saying what these two variables are saying in connection to our research. So is this supporting our research? Is this not supporting our research? And we are just going further than what is presented to us. We are taking our data and going more in depth into it, and we are explaining why it is important. We are also drawing our first assumptions actually, about our variables and if they are connected or not. For a causal model, we are just stating which is our explanatory and which is our response variable and why we chose this. We are saying if this decision is due to literature review or if it's just due to personal reasons. For our data management, we are using graphs that are related to our causal model. So for example, if I have a causal model between a categorical and a categorical variable, my bivariate graph will be a mosaic plot. And then because it's a mosaic plot, I need to collapse my response variable. So I recommend that you guys go back in Canvas and just overlook what your variable needs and what formatting is appropriate for your variable. And we just need to have it before and after of our, if needed, we need to show it before and after of our collapsing. For the hypothesis test, we're just making sure that we're using the appropriate test for our causal model. For cat-to-cat models, we use the chi-square test. For cat-to-quantitative models, we use the Pearson correlate. We use the ANOVA test, sorry. And then for quant-to-quant, we use Pearson correlation. So we just want to make sure that we're using the appropriate test for our model. We also want to be using appropriate vocabulary for our null and alternate hypothesis. For example, the chi-square test is looking at expected versus observed values, so we want to include that when we're stating our null and alternate hypothesis. We just want to be very clear. We also want to explain why we are doing a statistical test, and that is based on the central limit theorem and how we don't actually have enough samples to make a clear assumption about a population. We are only working with one sample, so we need to run statistical tests which can give us a value that will then give us our p-value, which is like if we were running multiple samples. For the bivariate graphing, we are going to see both variables on a single graph. Graphing, we will see both variables on the same graph. And it's, again, we're going further into detail onto what we see in this graph. We are going further than what is just, we aren't repeating what is presented right in front of us, but we are using the skills we have used this semester and explaining further than that. We are stating what the data is saying, not just what we are seeing. We're going further into detail. Statistical values finding, we are just identifying the value that is associated with the hypothesis test, whether this be rho, f value, or our chi-squared value. We are just interpreting this value and seeing, and we are also putting where it is. We are getting a picture from SAS and putting it onto our slides so we can see where the value came from, and then we are interpreting this value. We are saying what this value, if this value shows evidence of an association or not. And remember, this is only evidence and it isn't conclusive. It will allow us to make a conclusion on our research, saying whether or not we accept or reject the null hypothesis. If it is below the alpha threshold, we will say our finding is statistically significant, and if it is above the alpha threshold, we will say it is not statistically significant. And then our p-value is just going to be our final piece of evidence that is going to allow us to say whether our two variables are associated or not. For conclusion, we need to say the overall results, and we need to say what is important about our research. We need to say what we found for our research and any areas we can further do for research. Our appendix is just our code, our SAS code, and for citation, this is just a citation of our literature review sources. So just to kind of recap real quick, our first slide is our intro slide. The second slide is why our research is being done, and whether our two variables are associated or not. Then we have our literature review and what we found from it. Our data source, which is the AdHealth Codebook. Our demographics from the AdHealth Codebook. Our two variables, and our frequency tables from the AdHealth Codebook and then put into SAS. Our graphing for our first variable, and then our graphing for the second variable, and going into further insights on these variables. Our analysis discussion, which is basically bringing these two variables together and explaining what we are saying overall about them. Then we have our causal model, which is just saying which is our explanatory variable and which is our response variable and why we did it this way. Depending on our causal model, if we need to collapse any data, this is where our data that is collapsed, we are just going to use, depending on our causal model, again, it's going to affect our hypothesis test. So if our causal model is cat-to-cat, we'll use the chi. If it is cat-to-quant, it is ANOVA, and quant-to-quant is Pearson correlation. And we are just using vocabulary that is adequate for each of our hypothesis tests. Depending on our hypothesis test, we will get a bivariate graph, whether that be a mosaic plot or a box plot. And here we are just gonna go further than what we see and explain what the data is telling us. We will then find our statistical value, our rho, our f value, or our chi-square value, and we will interpret this value and state what it is saying about our association, whether it supports or it doesn't support our association. And then we will use the p-value, which is our last piece of evidence, which allows us to make claims on a population scale, and we will use this p-value to basically answer a question. This p-value will either allow us to reject or accept our null hypothesis and state whether there is or is not an association. Our conclusion will just be an overview of this, and we are just going to state what we found, what is important about our research, and what areas affected our research, and we can look into further research. Appendix is just our code from SAS, and then our citation is just our literature review sources.